Alrighty, hi there again. My name is Alyssa Silva. Welcome. If this is your first time with us, welcome to AJU Open. And if this is your fifth or perhaps maybe even your 100th time with us on these webinar platforms, welcome back. We're really excited to have you here. Today, we have a very important and very timely talk featuring Sarah Hurwitz and Jon Falk. And before we get started, I do just want to remind everyone to put their questions in the Q&A function down there at the bottom of your screen. We'll get to those in the final 15 minutes of today's 45-minute webinar. And first, I would like to introduce Sarah Hurwitz, who is our AJU Public Fellow. And this is actually the final, save the best for last, if you will, Public Fellow program that we'll be having on our platform this year. So Sarah, thanks so much for rounding us out. She's not only an AJU Public Fellow, but she is also a former White House speechwriter for President Barack Obama and even First Lady Michelle Obama. And she's also an author of Here All Along. And so I'm sure you've seen her books either, it better be on your shelf. And if it's not, then you've seen it around on other people's shelves. If you haven't picked it up yet, definitely do. And Sarah will be in conversation with Jon Falk. So Jon Falk serves as the Vice President of Hillel International's Israel Action and Addressing Anti-Semitism program, which, as we all know, is of the utmost importance right now. And we are thrilled to have them both in conversation to shed some light on what's going on our college campuses today. And so without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Sarah and Jon to start this important conversation. And we'll be back just at the 10:30-ish mark for your questions. Thanks so much again.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Alyssa, for having us. Thanks to AJU. We are both thrilled to be here. Jon, thank you for joining me in conversation today. I think we're going to have a really great discussion. And let's just jump right in. What I would love to do is just to get the lay of the land. I know we have been seeing a lot in the news about campus anti-Semitism, particularly last year in the direct wake of October 7th. And now, what are things like this year? You really have your finger on the pulse here. And, what data do you have? What trends are you seeing that will help us better understand, the facts on the ground today?
Thanks, Sarah. It's a real pleasure to be here. One of the ways that I really want to talk about this is actually stepping back 10 years. Hillel International started counting data all the way back in 2014. And there were only 26 anti-Semitic incidents then. Really a small number, but each of those incidents impacted a student. So I don't want to lessen the lived experience of those students in 2014. During October of 2023, last year, following the horrific terrorist attacks caused by Hamas, we saw days with 26 incidents. Last year, we saw a total of 1,854 incidents. These are the reported incidents. This number is likely 2, 3, maybe even 4 times higher. And so I think it's important to really see that in context, to look at it over the decade. We've seen multiple jumps, right, to get from 26 up to 1854. We saw a big jump in 2016 after Charlottesville, where you heard chanting of the phrase, "Jews shall not replace us." And then we saw 2020 around COVID. As another place where anti-Semitism spiked. And then the last time Hamas was at war with Israel was in 2021. So those are the spikes we've seen, but we've seen nothing like what we saw in 2023. What's interesting right now is what's different in 1 year, right? We're looking about 13 months after those horrific terrorist attacks. And one of the big things that's different is there's less people perpetrating anti-Semitism today on campus than there was 12, 13 months ago. But what's clear is these people are more extreme than ever, the ones who are doing it. So it's a smaller number, right? If you were possibly going to join an encampment or I don't know, rip something down in a dorm room, now that there's consequences, it has changed. Right? You have to really hate Jews to want to perpetrate anti-Semitism because now there's a real penalty. Right. This summer, we saw a tremendous amount of support for university presidents to be really strong and to follow their rules. So that's really the big change we've seen from last year to this year. We're still seeing, sadly, a lot of physical assaults, not a thumbs up. I'm very sorry. Zoom thumbed up physical assaults. That's not a positive by any stretch. Still a lot of vandalism. And then the last thing, we at Hillel continue to be a target as the center of Jewish life on campus and the largest Jewish institution serving Jewish college students.
Well, that's all incredibly depressing. I guess it's better that there are fewer people doing this, but I don't love to hear that they're more extreme. I visited 20 campuses over the last year just to speak with students at Hillel's, and campuses are obviously quite diverse. There's a wide range, and we can't generalize. But at the places where I saw, I was really struck by how. What bothered me most weren't the big, loud encampments. What bothered me most was the kind of pervasive atmosphere on campus around Israel and Jews. There's almost this feeling that Israel is in the same bucket as the KKK or the Nazi Party. So, I can't go around saying, well, I'm a Nazi, but I'm a liberal Nazi. It's like, that's nonsense. You can't be any kind of Nazi. Or, oh, I'm in the KKK, but no, I don't hate minorities. I'm proud to be white. It's like, whoa. No, there is no contact you can have with the KKK or the Nazi Party that is acceptable, period. And to see Israel treated that way, I think that was really, all these students I was talking to had such thoughtful, nuanced, complicated opinions on Israel, and it sort of didn't matter. And I think that was pretty chilling. And just the kind of, the ostracization of students, the students feeling like they couldn't join certain clubs on campus because it was really a kind of no Zionist allowed vibe. Even if that wasn't stated, it was going to be a lot of talk at the, climate club or the reproductive rights club. There was going to be a lot of insulting of Zionists, which doesn't seem super relevant to climate or repro rights, but, do what you do. I also was just sort of stunned at how authority figures were in on this. Like that really took me aback, hearing a student tell me that her RA, her resident advisor in her dorm, would neither look at her nor speak to her because, this RA identified as an anti-Zionist, which is fine, it's a free country, but just wouldn't look at or speak to this freshman girl under her authority, which I just found that really chilling. And so I think, I really want to echo these incident numbers. Like you said, they're obviously much higher than the numbers you had. And it's very hard to capture some of what's happening. Is the thing where this RA won't look at the freshman in her charge, is that one incident? Is it a year-long incident? Is it an incident every time it happens? Is it an incident at all? You can there's almost a feeling like you're trying to kind of measure humidity with a bucket, and you're standing there with an empty bucket, but you're suffocating and sweating and soaked, and people say, well, your bucket's empty, you're fine. And you're trying to say, but I'm really feeling oppressed here. So I think that's challenging as we try to measure this. So I appreciate the perspective of kind of what it's like on the ground. And I have to say, Hillel is such a lifeline for these students, just seeing their community, their sense of joy, the support they got from the staff and the rabbis. It was pretty extraordinary. We'll talk more about that positive later, but I want to really make that point now as well. One thing I've been thinking about is how do we even understand this? That's something I've been working on another book now, and I've been trying to understand, what is this? And trying to analyze this, as to why this is happening. That's a sociological question that I'm not qualified to answer. People have looked into it, many factors. But, I think one thing that struck me when I was on campus is that sometimes Jewish students at Hillel would say, well, okay, it's not great, but it's not that bad here. And I would say, oh, I'm so glad to hear that. I'm going to walk through your campus wearing a t-shirt that says I'm a Zionist and I love Israel. And they were like, oh, no, don't do that. I just thought okay, if a Black student said to you, my campus is actually very racially, open and accepting of Black students, but I can't wear my Black Lives Matter t-shirt. I hope you wouldn't say, oh, that sounds okay. It's not okay. Or if an LGBTQ student said, oh, very, very welcoming for queer students, but I can't wear my pride flag t-shirt, obviously. That's not okay at all, right? I think we know what labels to put on that. When the majority is telling the minority how they can express their minority identity, I think we have a big problem. And then students would say, well, no, but it's not about Jews, it's about Israel. It's about Zionism. I'm like, okay, but if a Chinese American student walked through campus with a t-shirt that said, I love China, will people harass her or ostracize her? And they're like, well, no. I'm like, right, China's committing horrific human rights abuses, but I think your classmates understand that China's a country, and they're probably going to assume that your classmate does not support the Chinese government, but maybe has family there, heritage there, is passionate about the language, the culture, maybe studied abroad there. I think they can actually somehow grasp those two very basic ideas. But when it comes to Israel, they really aren't able to grasp that. And I think that is, it's a little troubling. And, you know, whether you call this anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism, I mean, we can have this fight until kingdom come. But at the end of the day, if students are being harassed for their identity, then maybe we have a problem. Could we just call it a problem? I think that was something that really just struck me. I think we're getting a little bit caught up in definitions here and maybe just ignoring the fact that, you know, if a student can't wear a BLM t-shirt, is that racism? Is it not? We can have a big conversation. Whatever you call it, it's wrong. Like, that's actually a big problem that we need to deal with. And I feel similarly about the atmosphere on some campuses. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on any of that, or just, you know, kind of understanding the bigger reasons as to why this is happening, or just trying to even think clearly about it.
Yeah, I want to go all the way back to one of the things you shared, Sarah, which continues to stick with me, and I've really seen it play out even more. For those who don't know, Sarah was on campus. What was it, October 10th of 2023?
October 10th.
Right. Sarah was there just 3 days after those horrific attacks. So Sarah got to hear firsthand from what students were dealing with. At that time, Jews were actually experiencing a little bit of sympathy, but still much of what you shared about wearing that T-shirt of whatever it may be would have been questioned. We continue to see Jews forced out of progressive spaces, like you mentioned, environmental clubs. But what we're seeing is actually more students who are engaging with Judaism, Jewish leadership, who are flocking to Hillel's. It's definitely their safe place. We're so lucky to have so many buildings and such vibrant Jewish life. Attendance is still up. This past summer, when students came back to campus, right? They did Fall Fest, welcome back for first year students. Those numbers were higher than we've ever seen before. People wanted to be in those conversations. They wanted to be engaged. They wanted to make sure that they had a safe place to go, and parents wanted that too. And so I always say, and if there's some parents on this call, make sure you stop by Hillel with your student or your grandchild or whatever it may be. They might fall in love, and many students have fallen in love since this increase. It's just so sad that it's taken some anti-Semitic incidents for people to know they have a safe place at Hillel.
I mean, that's absolutely right. And I definitely saw that in my visits. You know, I saw this sense of joy, like the number of students who said something to the effect of, if it weren't for Hillel, I would have dropped out. It was sort of, I kept sharing it. I was like, I get it. This is your lifeline. And I really appreciate what you all are doing. You know, you mentioned earlier at the beginning, you talked about consequences. You know, back a year ago, I really had the sense on these campuses, it was like no consequences. You could do pretty much whatever you want, including crimes, like just flat out crimes. And it was like, maybe there'd be discipline, but sort of not really. Oops, no, you're fine. So what I'm curious about is, like, what have campuses been doing to crack down, to actually make sure that, you know, state laws and federal laws are enforced, but also that their own campus policies are enforced?
Yeah, I want to go all the way back to the congressional hearing with 3 university presidents. For those who don't remember, there was the president from Penn, the president from Harvard, and the president from MIT. Oh, again, I got a lot of Zoom reactions here. But we are really happy that there were congressional hearings.
No.
And one of the things that was asked, and I just want to actually read it so everyone can hear the quote of the question was, is calling for genocides of Jews, does that constitute bullying or harassment? That was that question where multiple presidents responded, context matters. I really believe that that was the start of, we have a problem and change will happen. I think Congress focusing on this issue is really important. We've seen the impact of multiple hearings since. Look, 2 of those 3 presidents are no longer in their roles because they really couldn't get this answer right. They need to protect Jewish students like they protect all students. I think folks sometimes forget Jews are a minority and need protection on campus. It's been incredible to see some presidents step up this fall, where we've seen action change. It's not new rules. That's the number one thing we always say. We don't need new rules by university presidents and by universities. We just need presidents to enforce the rules. Rules like time, place, and manner. You can't be yelling that you want to do X or Y at 4 a.m. Targeting a community, right? That's a rule you can't do. And so I'd love to give examples, if that's okay, Sarah.
Please, no, I think that would be very helpful.
Who have really stepped up. Cornell, to me, has instituted one of the more interesting policies. This past year, they created a 3-strike policy. And they actually put body cameras on their officers so they could enforce those 3 strikes. What's interesting was the real interesting third strike that actually really changed climate on campus was at a career fair. Not something Jewish, not something. It was for students to interview for jobs, to meet folks, to hopefully get a job. And one of the companies was Boeing. Boeing, of course, is often a target of the BDS movement, and so these anti-Israel activists came to campus. They were led by Professor Rickford, who is a professor at Cornell, who days after said he was exhilarated by the events of October 7th. Really horrible, someone who really riled up the community. What was important here is those students got the third strike on that incident. Many parents, non-Jewish, right? You should get to know your neighbors. They should also call universities upset when Jews are attacked. But non-Jewish parents called and said, "You're stopping my child from getting a job, right? You are getting in the way of why we just spent however many thousands upon thousands of dollars in 4 years to get a job. You're stopping it." And so we really saw an incredible response. We saw one individual whose visa was removed, multiple students suspended, and it's really changed the climate on campus. Again, these people did the wrong thing. There are consequences. Cornell really did it right, and we continue to see this at Michigan too. President Ono is a leader here, right? He made sure that when Jewish students were assaulted and harassed, that they were arrested, they were removed from campus. There's a penalty for anti-Semitism, and the more we see this, the better off campus will be. We're not asking for new rules. We just want folks to feel safe and be safe like any student on campus.
I mean, that's so, I like just emphasizing that point is so clear, because I've kind of heard this very kind of ugly pushback of like, oh, they want special treatment. Oh, these kids, they're freaking out about microaggressions or sort of this nonsense. I'm like, I don't think assault is a microaggression. I don't think that a professor announcing that all Jews have the blood of all Palestinians on their hand in class one day, true story, that's not a microaggression, right? We're kind of we're really beyond the kind of like, oh, we can just dismiss this as some kooky one-offs. And I think, to hear that universities are just literally enforcing their policies, that's, it's sort of, I'm so happy that we've gotten to this point. It is a little stunning that it took this long. I've often, when I'm kind of getting into debates with people about this, I just have to stop and say, do me a favor. Just when you hear the word Jew or Zionist, just substitute the name of any other minority group on campus and then tell me if it's okay. And, reflecting is like, why is that? Right? Like, why is that? I think there is some interesting, deeper things to think about there that I'm still trying to process, but it is strange that it took us this long to realize that, assaulting people maybe isn't great, or that, disrupting a career fair is actually a problem. Like, it's great that we're here, but it's taken a little longer than perhaps we would have liked, but glad that we're there.
And Sarah, I just want to be clear, we still have a really long way to go.
Okay.
But before 2023, we had never seen more than 5 physical assaults of Jews in a year. And by the way, each of those experiences were horrible for those students, for their families. But we continue to see high levels of assault, right? I talked about those extreme folks who are still in the mix. We've had many students who have had to go to the hospital. But the one thing these students know is that their Hillel directors, their Hillel professionals, and their Hillel friends are going to be there for them. And so to us, the most important thing we can do is make sure Jewish students know they're not alone, that no matter what happens on campus, Hillel will have their back. And so that's the work that we're doing every day. We can't predict when someone's going to come behind a Jewish student and sucker punch them from the backside, which we've seen now multiple times, right? Anyone who's wearing something showing their Judaism has been a target. And so that to me is what is still so upsetting. And we still have a ways to go. Just as we've deterred much, we're still trending 3 times higher than we've seen in other points before 2023. So we're still at a really high level. We're just not seeing the tremendous spike we saw last October.
I mean, it's, it strikes me that not only is Hillel kind of front facing on the campus, so when a student, students can go there when they need it, you all are doing so much work behind the scenes, working with university administrators. There is a lot of tedious, hard, frustrating behind the scenes work that I've watched you all be doing over the last year. And I don't think a lot of people are quite aware of how deep, that work is. And I really appreciate it very much. One thing that struck me is I was at a campus and I was wearing a almost like rapper size Magen David Jewish Star, because it was one of the worst campuses. And I just wanted to be real clear about where I was. And I remember talking to one of the students and I said, look, could I join a progressive club on this campus? And she said, not if you're wearing that star, girl. I thought, like, wow, what a, again, is like, how do you measure that as an incident, right? It's not a sucker punch, it's not a vandalism, but again, this pervasive atmosphere. And I do think, at least it seems like we are getting to the point where you're shrinking the number of students doing this to some extremists. It's becoming less popular, but man, those extremists are loud. So it's no joke, it really is.
Sarah, going to
Please.
that before we go to the next thing, we haven't talked about social media, right? When you talk about all the conversations that you heard on campus, the other factor that we can't measure is social media.
Yes.
And we saw this all the way back in 2021. Of course, social media has been around way longer than that. But we saw in 2021 that a student shared with me that they used to check their roommate's Instagram before going to sleep to see what their roommate would say, because they were so scared what they would say based on who was in the bed next to them. And that's when we knew we had a huge problem. We've done a lot to really help educate on social media, but those are incidents that we don't count. We don't know about every time someone posts something horrible, just as those things that someone may hear when they're in the dining hall or in the dorm room. They don't make it into that 1,800 plus incident count from last year. That's what's so hard. It just continues to build and build and build. And that oasis of social media where people believe things that are not true as truth.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because that's something I heard again and again from students. And look, I'm an old person, right? I'm Gen X, I'm 47. Social media is not my world. It's not real to me. For these kids, it is real. It is their world. The things that happen on there are real. And the number of times I've talked to students and they'd say, this one guy, young man, he was saying, I had a classmate who has very different views than I do on Israel. But we sat down, we had a great conversation. I felt like, okay, you know what, we disagree, but it was respectful. We both learned a lot. He said, then like a few hours later, I opened up her Instagram and like she posted the most vile, hateful, ugly things that were in no way reflective of the conversation we just had. I just thought like, oh my God, this is a realm that you and I went to college in the 90s. Incomprehensible to me. Right? That what these poor young people are dealing with, it's just like, there's so many spheres in which they have to live. And I think that's a great and really important point. So I want to just, let's switch over to ending on a somewhat positive note. You talked a little bit about the positive. I'd like to say, for me, when I think about like, okay, a lot has gone wrong the past year, but a lot has gone right. And I think that's something that struck me. And I've said this many times, when I first started doing these visits, I was really convinced, this generation, they're going to speak in memes. They're going to, these Hillel kids, they're going to shut each other down and cancel each other and talk in slogans. And it's going to be insufferable, but, I'm going to be patient. But what I found was so stunning, like the Hillel students, the Jewish students at Hillel, they spoke with such care and precision and nuance. And they'd be like, okay, here's my argument, but I also recognize these 3 counter arguments. And then another kid would jump in and be like, oh, hey, friend, you forgot about this fact. I don't think that's quite fair. I mean, I said something about anti-Zionist students, and this young man wrote me this long email saying, you know what, I'm a Zionist, but I think you were a little bit unfair in these 3 ways. And he was right. And I thought it was maybe just a one-off. It was at the first college I went to. I thought, oh, maybe this group of Hillel kids is special. I saw it again and again. The care, the nuance, and I could not figure it out because it was so different from the overall atmosphere on campus. But I began to realize that, Jewish kids aren't given the leeway that other kids are. They can't just throw a tantrum and shout their feelings and expect everyone to scamper around them. They're not given that courtesy. So they learn to actually learn facts. They learn to actually think carefully. Like they're constantly attacked and questioned. So they learn to question themselves. And, they go to Hillel and they talk to the rabbi, the director, the Israel fellow, and they debate ideas. They actually are getting what's called an education, which is so quaint. I mean, who does that anymore on a college campus? But these young people are doing that. And it made me think of something that the early Zionist thinker, Ahad Ha'am, he wrote about this idea of how Jews, because of things like the blood libel, which was the ridiculous anti-Semitic lie that Jews drink Christian babies' blood, any Jew who knows anything about Jewish tradition knows that's a lie. we expressly forbid the consumption of blood, right? It's such an obvious lie that Jews very early on learned that actually everyone else can be wrong and the Jews can be right. That actually oftentimes the mob is wrong. And, I see these kids learning that lesson. Like, I really see these kids beginning to realize, like, oh, wait, everyone can be wrong and I can be right. And that's actually like, it's a real inoculation against mob think and group think. And that has been pretty moving to watch, in addition to just the Jewish joy and the humor and the fun these kids have together. I mean, the Hillel directors I met, they don't want to sit around talking about anti-Semitism all the time because they know that's not good for students. I hear these like activists are sometimes coming in with this absolutely unhelpful message of like, Hillel needs to make these kids warriors for Israel. And if you do that, they will walk out that door and never come back. That is the wrong message from start to finish, right? Hillel absolutely helps students talk about anti-Semitism, talk about Israel, but it also helps them be passionate, connected, engaged Jews, right? It's engaging them in Judaism and Jewish tradition and Jewish joy. And I just think that is so incredibly important. And I saw a lot of that. So I'd love to hear your perspective on this as well.
Sarah, I think that's exactly right. I mean, hearing your story about getting educated, look, we believe in our namesake, Rabbi Hillel. There's no better way forward than education. We want students to see the whole picture. We want students to learn. I think there are many students who end up standing up for Israel because they've learned, right? And I think that's why we are so about education and about being education forward. We've just seen the impact of that. I have to mention a student last year, Talia Jor. She's one of my heroes. She was a senior at Cornell last year. She spoke on the Ways and Means Committee. I have to go back to those congressional hearings. Congress matters, and we can't forget that. And her impact of standing up inspired thousands of students across the country. But Talia Jor is just one of many, right? She's definitely one of my heroes, but there's many students. There's students at each of these universities who are like Talia Jor. And so to me, that's what's incredible, is it's not just one student. There are hundreds of student leaders. We created the Israel Leadership Network, which trains and really educates presidents of Israel clubs. So this could be like at UCLA, the president of Bruins for Israel, or at Ohio State, the president of Buckeyes for Israel. That work is so important. Right now, we're on over 215 campuses. All 8 Ivies are represented, 9 of 9 University of California system, even 4 military academies. And I think, Sarah, you got to meet some of these students. Maybe you'll share that experience.
Oh my gosh, these kids. I mean, if you have any doubt about the future, these kids will set you really straight. I think what you're getting to that's so important is you're really training the next generation of Jewish leaders. I really saw something I appreciate about Hillel is it's not like, okay, come to us and we'll kind of baby you and coddle you and give you everything. It's come to us and tell us what excites you, it ignites you, and we're going to give you the tools to build things yourself, right? We're going to really, and I saw they loved it. Like these students just came alive. Like I saw them creating things, running things. It was really quite, it was inspiring. I saw the cross-campus connections. At these big conferences, you have these Hillel students from across the country coming together, and it's so cute. They're kind of like gangs of them that are all now friends across campus, and they have these national networks of engaged, passionate Jewish young people, and they're so, I don't know, I just, this is something really special that you all are doing, and I very much appreciate it. We need it.
I have to share, we just hosted 3 huge concerts. It was called Yallapalooza. It's one of those incredible moments where Matis Yahu performed at them, Netta, all these different famous Israeli and Jewish musicians, and over 2,000 students in each city, in New York City, in Boston, and in Philadelphia. It was incredible. Our students also need joy, right? We can't just live fighting anti-Semitism without joy. We need something to live for. And they were all sold out, right? Students really want to be together. They want to be celebrating, and they want to find joy, because we need light in these dark times with so much hate that our students are experiencing right now.
There is also no greater disrespect to the extraordinary treasure that is Jewish tradition than to reduce ourselves to nothing but anti-Semites. That is an incredible disrespect and desecration of 4,000 years of Jewish tradition, and I reject it. And I appreciate the emphasis Hillel has on, yes, fighting anti-Semitism, yes, standing up for Israel, and also the 4,000 years of Jewish tradition that has sustained our people through a lot. So I appreciate that. So we are going to open it up to Q&A, and I think Alyssa is going to moderate this part.
Yes, all righty, let's get it started. We have a ton of questions. We have 26. I'm not sure we're going to be able to get to all of them, but we will try our darndest. So first off, from Morley Goldberg, they write, are there any organized programs to prepare young people before they enter university for what and how they might do when on campus? So are there any programs that they can do before they actually step onto the college campus, perhaps in high school or synagogues, et cetera?
Yeah, I think there's so many actually. I always look to our partners at BBYO who run incredible programs. It's a great place to meet peer students. Many are doing pre-college education. I also think about the importance of travel to Israel in high school. One of the great places to learn is through a Route One program, right? To travel to Israel. It's so hard right now traveling to Israel, just as we saw the difficulties around COVID, and then we saw this incredible rush of college students wanting to go to Israel. Right now, it's so hard. And so one of the big things we're doing is trying to make sure when students enter campus, the first place they go is to Hillel, so they can learn and really understand the campus environment, know that they may be a few miles down the road from their parents or 3,000 miles away from their parents, and know that they have a home away from home. So that's really important for us.
Awesome. And then I also do want to plug that American Jewish University has the Jewish Learning Experience. Natalie can probably put a link in the chat for that, but that's a program that goes through synagogues across the United States and has a class for credit actually about Israel, history of Israel, anti-Semitism, Zionism, etc. So definitely check that out as well. Moving forward, there's a couple questions that are very similar, so I'm just kind of gonna combine them. We've talked about Hillel, which I was super involved with and have worked with in the past, and is a fabulous resource for students. But there's some questions here about what if a student doesn't connect with their Hillel? Are there any other Jewish spaces for them to go and to feel safe and celebrated?
John, go ahead. I mean,
Sure.
Chabad. That would be the first one.
Yeah. And look, I think there are many students who go to Hillel and Chabad. When I worked on campus, we had many students who would have Friday night dinner at Hillel and would go Saturday afternoon for Chabad lunch or vice versa. There's also Jewish fraternities and sororities. One of the big things that we saw last year in the data when we would survey is the one thing that Jewish students always wanted to make sure they had was Jewish spaces. It was the one place they felt safe. And that's not just Hillel, that's Hillel's, Chabad's, it's Jewish fraternities, Jewish sororities. I'm sure there's some even Jewish intramural teams, right? I'm sure there's that soccer club on campus or that volleyball club. I think there's a variety. Oh, yeah. Wow.
Jewish acapella. Big thing.
Yeah, we have a big acapella competition coming up. It's cutthroat acapella.
Yes.
And there are so many Jewish acapella groups. So there's probably Jewish knitting groups for all I know. And so I think that's really what we've seen is even more Jewish affinity groups have been built out because of that. But Sarah, you probably have more thoughts on this as well.
No, I think, and I think there was, a point where there were some students who were less engaged as Jews and who were so kind of overwhelmed by the anti-Semitism on campus that they were like, oh, I don't know, will I go to Hillel and I'll get yelled at as being a Zionist? And something I saw that was really smart was Hillel's kind of doing events outside the building, right? Where they were finding ways to kind of just lower the bar to entry. So I think Hillel is a bit broader than the building and things that go on inside of it. I think, I saw them, it's like, oh, there's a Shabbat dinner that the Hillel rabbi is going to have at their house, and they'll just invite people over to their house, not in the building. Maybe it's off campus. So I think there was kind of a broader approach even through Hillel, and that's definitely, Chabad for sure is very popular. And I did see a lot of students I talked to did, it's like the number of Jews I know who hop between shuls, right? That's like, I got 2 shuls, 3 shuls. I mean, students, they were just hopping around, doing all the things. So a lot of opportunities.
Amazing. Thank you both so much. Moving on to another couple questions that are very similar. So it's kind of twofold. How is it that Columbia, for example, has had such a hard time in the last year with anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism, et cetera, when there are so many Jews that go to Columbia and live right in that area? And then vice versa, why is it that, and maybe there's a why, maybe there's a hypothesis here, and then why is it that on Texas campuses, where maybe there's less Jews, less of a Jewish presence, we're seeing fewer protests or less serious protests? What can you speak to that on?
I mean, I will say, I think John is going to be better suited to handle this than I will, but I think something that would often happen is I'd tell someone I went to 20 campuses and they'd say, oh, it's the elite schools. That's the problem. I'd say, nope, I went to a, non-elite school. It was pretty bad. And they'd say, okay, it's the small schools. I was like, nope, I was just at a big campus. And they'd say, well, it's this kind of school. It's like, no, I was at it. I really found that it was very hard to predict, that there wasn't some characteristic of like, oh, if there are a lot of Jews, it will be bad, or if there are a lot of Jews, it will be good. I can tell you examples of actually both of those things. So I think the actual factors that make a campus good or bad, I think they're very messy. John, I don't know if you want to weigh in, if you have more thoughts. I mean, I can speculate, but I don't feel like I know enough to say something.
Sure. I think it's really important to understand it only takes one person to perpetrate anti-Semitism, right? You can see anti-Semitic incidents. You can see multiple by one person. So it only takes one bad actor. For a long time, there was a school in California that just year after year, they were bringing BDS. And then it's been so quiet there. And it's things change, right? Thank God, unlike synagogue life, every 4 years, the population fully turns over. That's really an incredible thing. What I want to say about a place like Columbia is some of the most vibrant Jewish life in the country. So I think it's really important to understand that both things can be true. You could be dealing with huge anti-Semitic challenges, but also some of the most vibrant Jewish life in the country. And so that for us is really important. Look, many of our Hillels are thriving because of this. We have really vibrant Jewish life, huge number of students, Jewish students involved. It's just hard to predict, right? We've had campuses who had never had an anti-Semitic incident, and then fall of 2013, they had 5. Right. That is something that we just can't predict that. We can look at the data. We can understand the trends. We can follow what happened around the encampments when at the time, now former President Shafiq of Columbia, when she got out of her congressional hearing, all of a sudden, all these green tents popped up on Columbia's campus. And then all of a sudden at 10 other neighboring campuses within 48 hours. And then we got up to almost 110. And so it's hard to predict what's going to be that spark. And so we know when anti-Semitism peaks when Jews are publicly Jewish. So we see it around high holidays. If Hanukkah happens during the academic year, we'll see it then as well. And then we'll also see it around Passover, around Yom Ha'atzmaut as well, the Israel celebration of Israel's Independence Day.
I think also, I do think the extent to which an administration cracks down, I think can have some effect, although not necessarily. I think, campuses where students are sort of politically apathetic, not really engaged in social issues, I do think that makes a difference. I think they're less likely to be caught up in this stuff. I also think, I think what John was alluding to with the tents is like our director of national security, Avril Haines, I was stunned. I mean, she issued an official DNI release saying that some of these protests are being fomented by foreign actors, which that is I was stunned by that. That's a very, very dramatic thing for them to say. So I do think that there is some foreign influence going on here as well. And I don't, it's like that also has an effect. There's just a lot of circumstances.
I do want to make sure before we get to the next question that folks know about Hill International's Campus Climate Initiative. This past September, we brought together over 70 university presidents to come together and learn. These are from elite institutions. These are not from campuses we wouldn't know the name of. These are our top campuses across the country to really think about this problem and think about how they can support Jewish students, how they can actually not just put in new rules, but actually enforce those rules, which you're going to continue to hear me say. And that's been really effective. President Ono at Michigan, like I mentioned, he was there. Right. He was on stage. There have been many presidents who have really made a commitment this year and for the future to make sure they're protecting all their students.
That's fantastic to know. Thank you so much, John, for sharing that. There's a few questions, once again, that are very similar about Jewish students who are anti-Zionist themselves, who are anti-Israel, who do not find that those pro-Israel spaces are for them. What is Hillel and what are other Jewish organizations on campus doing to ensure that those Jewish students also have a place?
We at Hillel, we don't check people's card, are you a Zionist or not, when you enter the door. And everyone is welcome for Shabbat dinner. I mean, at the end of the day, Hillel is a Zionist organization. We believe deeply in Israel's right to exist. So I do think that's important. We don't ask people before you get chicken or tofu or whatever you choose at Shabbat dinner what your thoughts are on Israel. We really believe in education. We would invite those folks to really come into the door and learn. One of the big things we started after October 7th was our teach-in tour. We saw so many in the anti-Israel and anti-Semitic spaces bringing faculty members who don't believe Israel should exist, who are sharing horrible things. And so we've brought over 20 different scholars to over 150 different campuses across the United States in the last 13 months to actually teach in the classroom. And Sarah's done some of this work actually, which has been really incredible. It's been great, I'm sure, to meet Jewish students, but you probably have met some non-Jewish students also who have got to learn from you. And really for us, it's about teaching, it's about learning. This is what we do at our core as Jews. If we're not learning, we're not moving forward. Teaching has changed the landscape for many students because they get to ask experts who were in the room with Yitzhak Rabin before the Oslo Peace Accords, right? To be able to ask former Ambassador Dennis Ross questions about Oslo. There's no one who knows it better than Dennis, right? And so bring him to campus. Bring someone like Sarah, who really found your Jewish path and Jewish meaning, and to be able to share that has been so special. So we try and bring an array of folks to campus so that any Jewish student, even if they're questioning their Zionism, their Judaism, their stance on Israel, that they can really engage with an expert.
Yeah, I really want to drive home that point because I think what I was seeing was a real kind of, I'm going to call it a kind of anti-Semitic attitude on campus, that Hillel is a Zionist entity, which means they love slaughtering Palestinians. It's like, what? Wow, that is a very old and very ugly anti-Semitic trope. Hillel is a Zionist entity in the sense that it thinks Israel should exist. I think that seems like a pretty minimal thing that I would hope most of us could agree on. But I have to tell you, I talked to students with a very wide variety of views on Israel. I talked to anti-Zionist students at Hillel who were like, yeah, I'm an anti-Zionist, but like I come to Hillel for Shabbat dinner. And I saw the staff and rabbis going out of their way to be welcoming to those students. Like that was a very big value at Hillel because it's for all Jewish students. You can think whatever you want. There's no ideology test when you walk in the door. It's about solidarity. It's about being part of the Jewish people and learning about the Jewish tradition. So I didn't see that. And I think it frustrates me that there has been this kind of idea that Hillel is some kind of like really right-wing Zionist space. It's like, nope. It's just kind of a very generic, like Israel should exist and a lot of views are welcome here kind of space. So the students I met had really thoughtful, nuanced, complicated views on Israel. They were thinking deeply about it. And I think that's what we should be doing. So I saw a lot of diverse students there.
That's fantastic to hear. I hope you quelled some people's misconceptions there with that, because absolutely Hillel is so diverse in religiosity and in political views and stances. So that's fabulous. I'm going to go ahead and do one last question, and then I'll give each of y'all a chance to wrap it up, to share any closing remarks. There's a couple questions regarding allyship with organizations, whether it's, CUFI, Christians United for Israel, or just the different religious institutions for students on campus, or with Students for Justice in Palestine themselves, or, just organizations from, different sort of allies that are being tapped into. Is there a strong focus on that? Is that something that you will be, if not, making stronger in the future? What does that look like?
I'll let John answer this, but I just want to quickly say, I can't tell you how many times Hillel Jewish students said, we reached out to SJP, to Students for Justice from Palestine. Like, we really want to have a dialogue. We said, we'll just get coffee off the record. It doesn't have to be anything big. And they were told again and again, no, that would be normalizing Zionists and we won't do that. So I do think there is such a strong desire among these kids. Like actually, one kid played me a video of him talking to his classmate who is screaming like, you're doing genocide, you're a terrorist, you're a Nazi. And he was like, hey man, thank you for sharing your views. I really want to engage with you. And the guy's like, you're a killer, you're this. The guy's like, okay, I hear what you're saying, but I really want it. And I was like, okay, that's sort of tough. But I've seen so much eagerness of Hillel students to reach out. So that desire is so there. I think the stopping point, at least with that aspect of allyship, it is on the other side. It's not Hillel, because they want to do that, right? That work is important. But John, you can say more.
Yeah, look, sadly, it's lonely being a Jewish student today. I think you have lots of Jewish friends, and hopefully you're in a place with other Jewish students. But if you're one of the few, it's going to be hard. We do a lot of work we call bridge building work, working with the Black community and other minorities on communities on campus. But one of the things that we've seen a lot of is SJP working with these other minority communities and really trying to take those communities over and create this like coalition against the Jews or coalition against Israel. And that's been really hard and really challenging. That's why students are being forced out of progressive spaces. Years ago, we saw a Jewish student who was forced out of a non-Jewish a cappella club because they were wearing a Jewish star, right? Like that is horrible that's the trend we've seen, and we continue to see more and more of it. By the way, these are the conversations in student government where SJP tries to define what is and what is not anti-Semitism in student platforms. That's the hard work that happens, and that's why the work of building these relationships is so important. So we're trying really hard, but it's a difficult time to build relationships if you're a Jewish student.
Yeah, I asked the students at one campus, they were telling me, okay, here are the clubs allied with SJP. It's this club, and it was like random obscure clubs that have nothing to do with anything. It's like the beekeeping club. I was like, really? They need a foreign policy? And I was like, all right, what are the clubs allied with Hillel? And it was just like the silence. And this one kid goes, none of them. I just thought like, whew, that is it's not easy, but they were still trying. They hadn't given up, and I respect that.
That's beautiful. No, thank you both so much. I want to give you both just a chance to say any last remarks. Maybe give some folks a little bit of hope moving forward, because there is so much good happening on college campuses, and there is so much positive for our Jewish students in our educational system. So please, some last remarks from you both before we close it out today.
You know, I came away from these visits feeling both kind of devastated, but also very hopeful about the Jewish students. And, you know, advice that I would give to them sometimes was, you know, look, obviously reach out, try to build bridges, try to build understanding with their classmates. But if they refuse, it's an option for you to do what Jews have always done in this country, which is build your own club, right? And make it radically open and inclusive and welcoming to everyone of every opinion, Zionist, anti-Zionist, doesn't matter, no ideology test to come in the door. And, you know, build the best club that campus has ever seen. And I think that, you know, this could be a time where some of the old institutions need to be disrupted, and maybe these young Jewish students, maybe they'll be leading the way. So I do feel a real sense of hope going forward.
I'm struck by our students' resilience, right? If you are 21, 22 years old, you've been through a lot, especially in the last 5 years. Seeing students who lost graduation because of COVID, who lost SAT or ACT tests. I don't know if that's a positive or negative that they lost those tests, whatever it may be, wearing masks, so you didn't get to interact with your classrooms, going to classes online. These students are more resilient than ever. Now layer on all of the anti-Semitism the average Jewish student is experiencing, or seeing, having a mezuzah ripped off their dorm room door, having food thrown at them in the dining hall, could have seen one of their dear friends being punched in the campus quad. All of that has made Jewish students more resilient than ever before. I never had to do any of those things. I remember one clear anti-Semitic incident in my 4 years in college, right? That's what it was 10, 15, 20 years ago. It's very different today. Even those campuses who never logged incidents are starting to see that. So you see Jewish students being more resilient and finding more leadership. We continue to see more and more Jewish students step up in this moment. I don't know if it's because they're no longer the president of the environmental club, and hopefully one day they will be, but they're presidents of Hillel, they're presidents of affinity groups. And I think leadership for the Jewish community is very bright because of this.
Beautiful. Thank you both so much, Sarah and Jon. Thank you for joining us today. And thank you to you, the viewers, our audience, for joining us for another AJU Open webinar. If you've been touched or moved by this event today, please consider a donation to AJU Open. We are delighted to offer these for free, and so please continue to help us do that. You can also find our upcoming events in the chat. There's a link. We have some really exciting classes coming up in December. On December 5th, we have It Takes Two to Torah with Abigail Progerben and Rabbi Dov Linzer. And then on December, where are we? And then on December 9th, we have Unbreakable Bonds with Zibby Owens and Rabbi Sherry Hirsch. So please do join us for those and all of our future events that are coming up. And again, thank you so much, Sarah and John, and to our folks over at Hillel International. We so appreciate your partnership, and we hope to do this again on a hopefully a more lighter note in the future. So thank you both again.